G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. In this video, I want to talk about flagships. I want to talk about Nikon's flagship, and I want to talk about what's even better than two of Nikon's flagships, and that is three of Nikon's flagships. Who wouldn't love to have three Z9s for their video photographic project? Maybe they're shooting the Matrix and they need to do bullet time. This camera continues to prove what an all-rounder flagship that it is, and in the light of firmware 5.1 that is giving us color control of zebras, it is giving us more customization of histograms and waveforms, and it is giving us shutter angles along with the zoom collaboration. We've seen a development announcement for it, the 28 to 135 f4, coming sometime soon. How good is this camera? It just keeps getting better. It is absolutely the definition of a flagship. It quacks like a flagship. It looks like a flagship. It feels like a flagship. Now, for those that maybe don't know Nikon's flagship history, I'm going to share a little bit of that with you today because I think it's super important to understand exactly where the Z9 fits and exactly what Nikon are doing with it. This is flagship mania. If this was the Royal Fleet, this would be an absolutely overwhelming flagship flotilla coming your way. We have the F5, the pinnacle in Nikon's film flagships from my perspective. Yes, they went on to make an F6, but it did not have the vertical grip, and it came out in the era of digital. It was more of a swan song camera to their extraordinary film lineage. We had the D1, which I never had. We had the D2X, which I did have, but sadly I did not keep. Then the D3, which was an absolutely pivotal moment in Nikon's digital history, their DSLR history. From my perspective, the jump between the D2X 12 megapixels APS-C to the D3 12 megapixels full frame was absolutely epic. The Nikon D3 planted Nikon's flag clearly that they were going to make state-of-the-art sensors and deliver a digital experience which somehow didn't really look that digital. It somehow looked a lot more like film. It was an absolute game-changing moment from my perspective. And a camera that is forgotten is the D3X that came out in 2008. The D3 was a 12 megapixel full frame flagship camera. The D3X that came out just a year or two later was 24 megapixels. It was the absolute pinnacle of Nikon's digital technology. It carried at the time a huge megapixel count, a huge price to go with it. This was absolutely state-of-the-art technology in a flagship with, at the time, Nikon's highest megapixel count in that flagship. This is 2008. And what Nikon did with the D3 and the D3X, both flagship cameras, they gave us either a choice of speed and slightly lower megapixels or less speed but higher megapixels. In 2012, the D4 arrived, toting 16 megapixels. But also the same year, Nikon did something a little bit different. Instead of there being a D4X, which a lot of us thought would come, in the end we saw the D800. And the idea behind the D800 was it wasn't fast, it didn't autofocus super fast, but it gave us 36 megapixels. So at this point in time, in 2012, there was a delineation between what the flagship was, which was fast, lower megapixels, and higher ISO performance, versus megapixels and being slower, among other things. Nikon continued this trend to 2016 where the D5 came out, and by then we were looking at D810, which was also 36 megapixels. And from my perspective, this was a great strategy because it allowed users to have the choice of high megapixels in the more affordable D800 series of cameras or speed and lower megapixels. The D6 was launched in 2020, and a couple of years earlier we got the D850 D850 2017, considered perhaps the best all-rounder DSLR of all time, which is reasonably fast, high megapixels, focuses pretty well, similar focusing system to the D500 and the D5. My suspicion is there's probably something that Nikon learnt with the D850, a camera that was still constrained over 1 year after it was launched. It was simply that popular, and that is even with the ever-growing buzz around mirrorless. Let's just remember, by 2018 the Z series was coming online, and the Sony Alpha series at that point in time had been around for 5 years. The D850 was still a huge success due to its amazing all-rounder capabilities. Of course, as the D6 is coming out, the Z9 is well on its way to being released. A year after the D6 was shipped, we got the first development announcement of the Z9, which Nikon stated themselves was going to be the most powerful, the fastest, the best flagship camera that they had ever made. Essentially, the D6 would have been made in the shadow of the Z9, with Nikon full well knowing that the D6 would be the last DSLR they ever made. The Z9 was officially launched October 2021, delivering an absolute all-rounder experience. It was able to shoot fast. It was able to shoot at 45 megapixels. It was able to shoot in so many conditions. But beyond that, it also had extraordinary video spec. Now, if we look back at this pedigree here.
And before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge that this strategy could also be seen right at the start with the D1, the D1, the D1X, the D1H, the D2X, the D2XS, the D2H, the D2HS. And the reason I haven't talked about them much in this video is because, of course, they were all APS-C cameras, but we can see the same strategy.
And we look back at what Nikon did in 2007, 8, 9, around the D3 and the D3X, the D4, the D800, the D5, the D810, the D6, and the D850. In all cases, it's kind of mixing those two first and second tier cameras in the range together, and we get the Z9 and we get the Z8. And the beauty of the situation that we're in now is, unlike in the past where you chose a D3 or a D3X, you had to choose to go one way or the other. Do you want megapixels but it's slower, or do you want less megapixels and it's fast? Nikon with the Z8 and the Z9 are giving us both, and you can literally choose the form factor that works best for you. Now, of course, there are a few differences between the cameras, like Z8 does not have GPS, Z8 does not have a built-in Ethernet port, although you can get an Ethernet port via USB-C, which of course the Z8 has 2 USB-C ports. Of course, it does not have the vertical grip. Of course, it does not have as large a battery. And of course, it does not have the same heat dissipation prowess. The build quality is still amazing, but it might not be quite as tank-like as the Z9. But from an image capturing perspective, from a speed perspective, from a video spec perspective, the Z8 and the Z9 are the same. And it's more about those external I/O and peripherals where the differences lie. To me, this is the crystallization, this is the summation of everything that Nikon has been working on, combining all of this technology into the, from my perspective, the ultimate all-rounder today. And you can just literally choose the form factor that best suits you. If you want the Z8 form factor, then you can go for it. And if you want to attach a vertical grip, you can. Or if you want the advantages that the Z9 brings, which I talked about before, at the moment, it's extraordinary value. Not only to me is the Z9 the flagship of flagships in the market, but even more importantly, from my perspective, it's the flagship of flagships for Nikon. I have been on this journey with Nikon since the F5, only missing 2 series of cameras, which was the D1 series and the D6. And for me, who's been a photographer and filmmaker, content creator, I've been an all-round, my use case is an all-rounder use case, and it always has been. I've bought video cameras in the past. I've bought all sorts of digital cameras to try and meet my creative ambitions. Nothing in this group of cameras allows me to meet my creative ambitions more so than the Z9 and its smaller sibling, the Z8. Sure, I was recently having a discussion with someone in regards to infrared beams on flashes don't work in the mirrorless era. Now, that's absolutely true. For my use case and how I shoot flash and what I do, that hasn't bothered me at all because I stopped using on-camera flash, and I'd like to think about this for a second, but I would say it would be something like 2010, maybe earlier. I had so many Nikon SB flashes. At my peak, I probably owned 8 of them. And I would set up masters and slaves and have them firing all over the place. But what happened was other solutions came into the market. Solutions that ran off rechargeable batteries. Solutions that were more powerful. Solutions that were more elegant to use. The user interfaces were easier. And continuing to work with AA batteries and then buying rechargeable AA batteries so that we could keep recycling batteries. But then that technology not really working as well as it was said it would work. It just simply changed. And it changed way before I went to mirrorless. And I'm going to guess close to a decade before the Z system came out. I stopped using Nikon's SB flashes way before mirrorless came around. It's never been a problem for me because I've never tried to use Nikon's on-camera flashes with IR. Z9, mirrorless, the summation of the past. We can see it here in the ergonomics and how they have just been refined and iterated, and it's just so gorgeous. And 99% of the technology that's come from here over to here, it's better. Ultimately, for the majority of use cases, we are getting way more. No video, very rudimentary video, still pretty rudimentary. Okay, not bad, outstanding video, best in the market. For me, for my use case, brilliant. Birders, old-fashioned birding. Yes, people were able to shoot birds. Now, you've just got bird detect. Anybody can shoot birds. It's there. From a stills perspective, you couldn't get anywhere near 20 frames per second RAW with any of these cameras. Now we're 20 frames per second RAW, 120 frames per second in JPEG, if you really need that many frames. Pre-capture didn't exist. Doesn't exist. No pre-capture. Pre-capture. You see what I mean? So for the majority of use cases, not all, right? Not all, but for the majority, and this is how any company has to design something. It's got to design something for the majority of the market that a product is aimed at. This is a far superior experience. And I know there's people out there that will be able to tell me aspects that aren't, like battery life. But to me, the battery life conversation is a non-starter. And the reason being is, it is so easy to carry extra batteries, or it's so easy to battery eliminate, which means just carry a little thin battery in your pocket and a little cable. It doesn't need to be a problem. It's only a problem if you want to make it a problem. Of course, these cameras could shoot 5,500 frames on one battery. I don't know, I think on a Z9 I've got 3,000, 3,500, 4,000, some pretty high numbers. In-body image stabilization, no in-body image stabilization. EVF, no EVF. These to me are advantages, and the advantages go on and on and on, and the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. And the final one is this mount. The Z mount and the Z glass, wow. For me, there's really nothing like it. And of course, everyone's going to have a different opinion on that. I love the fact that we all have different opinions. But for someone who bought Nikon's very best F glass to go with all of these cameras, because I love shooting in low light, I love shooting handheld. That's my use case. This system, for me and my use case, and the lenses they have, this is a couple of steps above whatever I could do here. So it really does depend on your use case. And there may well be some use cases out there where all this stuff is still fabulous. Nobody's saying there's anything wrong with this stuff. I never said that. I just said for my use case, I can do more with this. For your use case, you might be able to do more with this. It's possible. Flagship, back to where we started. There is no question to me that the Z9 and its little sibling, the Z8, is the summation of what we've seen from this moment on here in the mid-90s all the way to 25 years later. This is the summation of all of that DNA. And what's so phenomenal about this giant leap, which still has not been surpassed when you think of things like the sensor speed, which I still think is the fastest on the market before we get to global. This camera gives us technology like E-shutter, 1/32,000th of a second, These can't get near that. But it also gives us a shutter shield, protects our sensor. There is no shutter that is actuating. There's no shutter to wear out. The Z9 is the first step. It's sort of like what the D1 was. It's the first step in what's coming next. And if this is how Nikon is planning on playing ball, I just can't wait to see what's going to happen next. And look, these cameras iterated. They did. And I expect the Z9 to iterate as well. We're not going to have such a big leap as we had from D6 to Z9 anytime soon. We're not. Because today we can put extraordinarily powerful computers in these bodies, and they're essentially highly precise, high-end video cameras that can double at shooting stills. That's actually what's going on here. And this is not the paradigm these were created around. They could just never go to the places where this can go. And that means there's more. There's more to come. Don't know what it is. Can't wait. But this is Nikon's flagship. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me on this little jump back in time, looking at where the Z9 came from. All three of them. Not all three are mine, by the way. One of them has to go back. And why? There's no shadow of a doubt. When we think about the D3 and the D3X, the D3X being that 24 megapixel beast, absolute flagship, it's not a problem that this has the most megapixels Nikon creates, because they did it before and it wasn't that long ago. All right, everybody. Well, it's been so good to see you as usual. I'd love to know your thoughts about all of this, your experiences with Nikon's flagships, your joys. Are you still picking up old flagships today? I'd love to get a D2X, maybe a D1 at some stage. And I suppose if I was going to round out my flagship collection one day, a D6. All right, everybody, it's been so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, share, and like. All right, bye for now.